Hello, everybody. I'm Bryan Early. I'm a professor here at the University at Albany's Political Science Department, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our Spring 2026 Lunch and Learn series. The intention of this series is to highlight the expertise of Rockefeller College faculty, researchers, and staff, and to talk about not only the academic contributions that are being made by those research, but how their work can impact society, and really address some of the most important policy questions facing our state, our community, our country, and even the world. So, what we're hoping to do today is to have a presentation that then turns into a conversation that educates you and a little bit more on some of the specific issues that my colleague, Dr. Nolan Fahrenkopf, is working on. His presentation today is on cryptocurrency and its connection to a lot of global illicit economic activity, particularly the activities that contribute to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The work that he's doing and presenting upon is connected to the work that my project on international security, commerce, and economic statecraft, or PISCES team, is conducting here at Rockefeller College through the Center for Policy Research. We've got a team of 7 policy experts from political science, from the law backgrounds, some people with former government or industry experience, all working together to try to find ways to make it harder for dangerous non-state actors like terrorist groups and other countries to acquire weapons of mass destruction. So I'm the director of that initiative, and Dr. Fahrenkopf is one of our fellows who does active work on the use of interactive red teaming scenarios to help academics, industry members, and government officials find better policies for preventing WMD proliferation. He does work on proliferation financing, and then he also does work on aerospace proliferation as well. One of the really neat things about Dr. Fahrenkopf is he's actually a product of UAlbany. He got his undergraduate degree here, and then he went on to earn his PhD. So he's been contributing and studying these issues here within the university community for a very long time. So before we get started on our presentation, I just want to go over a couple of quick ground rules. Please remain muted throughout the course of the presentation. If you've got a question, you can raise your hand and I'll try to acknowledge it if Dr. Fahrenkopf doesn't see it, or you can put your question in the chat and I will read those to the group after we're done with Dr. Fahrenkopf's presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Fahrenkopf.
Thank you so much, Brian. Really excited to give this talk and be on this with Brian as well. Like you said, I'm a product of UAlbany. I did my undergrad there, my doctoral work there. So it's really great to continue to be able to engage in these types of events with Rockefeller College. It feels at home. I'm really happy to give this talk because I think this is one of the most interesting and really sticks to the word emerging, and that this is an area of proliferation financing and sanctions evasion to fund weapons program that is really volatile, and it's changing every day. There's new cases every day. There's new laws every day. So it's really a fascinating, rapidly evolving area. Before I get started, I'll just say my kids are on their second snow day in a row. So if a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old bursts in and interrupts me for a minute, I'm going to beg your forgiveness in advance. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But after 2 snow days in a row, they're getting a little antsy. So this is a presentation as a product of, like Brian said, a lot of the emerging work we have been doing in this field, where one of our primary roles is to provide research and policy expertise on helping industry, academics, and national governments prevent the illicit proliferation of weapons technology. And a large part of that is how state and non-state actors fund illicit weapons programs. And increasingly, we're seeing a large part of that is coming from the crypto space. And so understanding how cryptocurrency works, where it comes from, how it is illicitly acquired and diverted has really become an important foundational pillar of some of the work we're doing. So just as an overview for those of you who may not be familiar with cryptocurrency, cryptocurrency is, I think the best way to describe it, it's like a fully digital currency that very often is not tied to any sort of benchmark, right? It's not tied to a national government. It's not tied to any sort of value chain. It's just fully digital. These can range from really the most popular ones that we might know of, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, to stable coins that are usually pegged to some currency. So, for example, there are stable coins that are permanently trying to peg themselves to the value of the US dollar, but their transactions are fully digital, fully globalized. There's this real ease of access. And so there are dual use benefits to cryptocurrency, especially in areas that might not have access to electronic digital funds that are really one of the bedrocks of modern economy. At the same time, though, the very nature of cryptocurrency has shown that they're really vulnerable to laundering and exploitation. So I mentioned Bitcoin and Ethereum. This exploitation can range from what we're talking about today, where it's being stolen and laundered for illicit weapons programs, all the way to there's a large number of frauds related to cryptocurrency, where someone will create a cryptocurrency, create some kind of token, coin, they will build the value up and then liquidate their position, and then the price of the cryptocurrency rapidly drops, and you have essentially a crash where people might lose a lot of money. We won't be focusing on that as much in this talk, but really what I want to talk about is the role that it's playing in weapons proliferation and sanctions evasion. And so really we want to look at a handful of real case studies. And seems like every time I give this presentation over the last couple of years, I have to re-update the statistic, and that 2025 was a record year for cryptocurrency theft. So over $4 billion of cryptocurrency was stolen. So this isn't even about cryptocurrency that was laundered. This is just theft. $1.5 billion of that 4 billion number was stolen in one heist by the North Korea. And so you see right now that it's become a core means for sanctioned entities like North Korea to fund their weapons program and evade sanctions. And I'll talk a little bit further about what does a cryptocurrency bank heist essentially look like. The Financial Action Task Force, which is an international group that monitors and helps countries implement best practices related to anti-money laundering controls, has noted an increased use of cryptocurrency also by non-state actors and terrorist groups such as ISIL in Asia. Russia and DPRK also continue to use cryptocurrency to evade sanctions. And increasingly, we're also seeing cryptocurrency is gaining ease of access to be laundered through different ways to clean it. So to essentially move cryptocurrency from one location, make it look like it came from somewhere else, and clean it before it eventually goes on to another wallet. And so I'll be talking about all these different cases and steps throughout the presentation. So those of you who might follow this a little more closely, the price of Bitcoin has crashed recently. I think it's shed upwards of 40% of its value since the new year. Despite that, right, despite the fact that price of cryptocurrencies have dropped, that a lot of people might not fully understand what they are, or they're not really mainstream yet, they're here, they're not going away, and they remain a really dominant form of just economic exchange as well. And so one thing I like to do before I give this presentation is share an example of how much cryptocurrency is being exchanged at any one time. So this is a website that tracks the number of Bitcoin transactions happening in real time. And so this is just one cryptocurrency. Granted, it's one of the main ones, but it's just one cryptocurrency. And so in the, I think, what, 10 seconds I've had this open, we have seen 85, 96 now $1 million worth of US dollars in Bitcoin being transacted across the world, right? And now we're up to 100 million. Um, some of these are very large transactions, some of them very small transactions, but really just in 10, 15 seconds I've been showing this and talking about this, we've seen 102 million US dollars worth of Bitcoin being traded across the world. And so when you hear, oh, the price of Bitcoin is dropping, when you hear people maybe make comments about how legitimate it is or how real it is, yes, there are concerns about, fraud. There are concerns about um, how legitimate it is, but it's not going anywhere, right? There are a large number of transactions. These transactions value huge amounts of actual currency worth, and they're going on across the world and real time across a large number of different types of cryptocurrency and across a large number of services that provide services related to the buying, transferring, and storage of cryptocurrency as well. So one of the main areas where we're seeing illicit proliferators gain access to cryptocurrency to evade sanctions really focus on cyber attacks on virtual asset exchanges. So 2025 was a record year for North Korean heists of digital currency or cryptocurrency from virtual asset service providers. So these are essentially, they find a way to gain access to virtual asset service providers, which you can think of as any sort of entity that might provide any service related to cryptocurrency. So these are services that you can buy cryptocurrency from using hard or fiat currency, services that help you exchange different types of cryptocurrency, services that help you transfer cryptocurrency from one person to another, and services that essentially act like bank accounts that store your cryptocurrency for you. So the DPRK and other illicit actors will attack these services and steal this cryptocurrency. So the one case I'll talk about in a little while, the DPRK managed to steal $1.5 billion worth of cryptocurrency from just one service. They also engage in things such as cryptocurrency mining. So and these can also be termed as cryptojacking attacks, where illicit actors will use malware or computer viruses to gain access to computers around the world. And in the background, while you might be working on your computer will also be mining Bitcoin, where it's essentially computers solve complex algorithms and they're rewarded with a small amount of Bitcoin. And so North Korea at any one time might have 1 million computers at its disposal to engage in Bitcoin mining. They then launder these funds between different exchanges, between different cryptocurrencies, and into fiat currencies in order to either purchase the types of goods and equipment that they need for their weapons program, or move money around in order to support other sanctions evasion efforts and activities. And so this is an example of one of the types of attacks. This was actually from a few years ago called the WannaCry attack. So this was an example of DPRK cyber attacks engaging in hostage taking of essentially technology platforms in order to gain access to cryptocurrency. So what would happen is DPRK hackers would attack a hospital or a university or a company or a business with a computer virus that locks them out of all of their IT infrastructure. They'll then issue a ransom demand, essentially saying, if you want us to unlock your IT infrastructure, you need to send a certain number of a certain type of cryptocurrency, either Bitcoin or Ethereum usually, to this wallet at this time. And so they did this quite a bit. And the resulting damage was upwards of $8 billion. In terms of the types of damage caused. And it's thought that the DPRK was able to take home a large chunk of that as well towards profits, towards their sanction evasion activities. So the crux of this, and when we're thinking about the cases and the regulations, focus on this new class of economic entities known as virtual asset service providers. So like I said earlier, virtual asset service providers are any firm or entity. Sometimes they're just open source computer programs that provide services related to virtual assets or digital wallets. So these might be digital wallets, which you can think of as essentially cryptocurrency bank accounts, transfer services, which move cryptocurrency, mixers, which help enhance privacy controls of cryptocurrency transactions, which are increasingly being used to launder funds for illicit actors, brokerages and coin markets, which help you purchase or transfer different types of cryptocurrency. Now, the generally international best practice is that all of these should be considered something termed as obliged entities. And so when you think about the regulations and controls that traditional banks have on anti-money laundering, they should also apply to these as well. The actual implementation of these best practices is fairly varied across the world. So North Korea recognized very early the promise of cryptocurrency in order to engage in sanctions evasion. So North Korea is probably one of the most, if not the most, savvy sanctions evader. They've been under what is the most serious sanction regime for an incredibly long time. These are both unilateral sanctions and also UN official sanctions. And so North Korea recognized really, really early the promise of cryptocurrency, so much so that you can see here in 2019, they actually held a cryptocurrency conference where if you had a couple $1,000s to spare and you wanted to make a quick trip out to this really interesting looking hotel in Pyongyang, you could have gone and attended the DPRK's inaugural cryptocurrency conference. I would not recommend going to a cryptocurrency conference in Pyongyang for a number of reasons, which we'll find out shortly. But you could have done that. And one of the things that DPRK did is they identified experts in the cryptocurrency field who had ideological motivations essentially behind cryptocurrency, that they believed in the existence of an economic platform and currency outside of government regulation and control. And they invited these speakers to this conference. And one of these happened to be an American programmer, cryptocurrency expert, who's actually critical to the development of the Ethereum cryptocurrency. This individual was invited to the this conference. They came, they joined. By all accounts, they showed up. Their passports were taken, but then they were offered, rewards essentially to help the DPRK officials learn how to best utilize cryptocurrency to engage in sanctions evasion. So this individual went there knowing that's what they wanted. They spent a week there having back channel meetings with DPRK officials who turned out to be intelligence agents. And then they returned to the United States and were promptly arrested for engaging in various sanctions evasion activities. So this individual was pled guilty and is serving, I think, 10 to 15 years in prison for a myriad of sanctions evasions. But this conference right here, 2019, Bitcoin was, maybe cryptocurrency was starting to be on the map for some people, but really 2019 pre-pandemic, cryptocurrency was a lot more niche than it was now. And despite that, the DPRK recognized already how fundamentally important this could be to their sanctions evasion efforts. And this really, really paid off for them. One of the ways it paid off for them is just last year. This was the February 2025 hack of Bybit. Bybit is a UAE-based cryptocurrency virtual asset service provider. They're essentially provide a number of different services. They provide wallet services, so virtual cryptocurrency bank accounts. They also provide transfer services and market services. So you can store your cryptocurrency here, you can purchase cryptocurrency here, you can transfer cryptocurrency between different wallets here. So the DPRK hacker group called Trader, which is a pretty clever name. They happen to have really clever names. One of my favorite DPRK hacking names is the "Who is this hacking group?" Something. They're very clever in that regards. But anyway, this hacker group linked to the DPRK intelligence services targeted a contractor working for Bybit. And so what Bybit does is what they essentially have is they have cold wallets and warm wallets. A cold wallet is a fully offline wallet. So you can think of it as like a USB stick that has your cryptocurrency on it, not connected to the internet. I'm sure you've heard stories about individuals who had like 100 Bitcoin on a cold wallet that they accidentally threw away. I think there's one person who fundraised in order to search through their local dump in order to try to find the one little flash drive that had like 100 Bitcoin on it, which when they bought it was probably like $20, but is now worth, tens of millions of dollars. So one of the things that Bybit does is they help customers take cryptocurrency from their cold wallet and move it to warm wallets. So warm wallets are connected to the internet, but they have essentially dual factor authentication in order to move them. And this dual factor authentication has to come from both the person and the entity, so Bybit itself. And so warm wallets are thought of as really secure wallets, second only most secure to cold wallets, which are offline, in regards to moving cryptocurrency between wallets. So what the DPRK did is they found out who the contractor was who helped provide the security and authentication services for Bybit. They then engaged in a very sophisticated social engineering attack where they posed as a famous open source researcher who does security safeguards in this field, requested access to the programming, were granted access to the programming, and then essentially inputted their own code to run all the authentications through themselves. And so you can think of this as essentially a digital bank robbery, just without the masks and the firearms and going in and doing it yourself. That's exactly what happened here. They essentially found a way to hijack the digital trucks, moving the digital currency from one account to another account, or from one bank to another bank. And they use this malware to then funnel all of this cryptocurrency to themselves and their own wallets. Before they were caught, they managed to steal $1.5 billion worth of cryptocurrency from this virtual asset service provider. Some of that has been recovered. So there has been extensive work tracing where this money has gone. The United States has managed to identify and freeze some digital wallets linked to the theft. I think also last year, the Greek and Italian monetary authorities identified some and froze them. But really, the vast majority of this money is gone. It's been washed, it has been laundered, it's not going to be found. And so we think back to this conference where in 2019, someone at DPRK thought, this is going to pay dividends down the line. 2025, it paid huge dividends in one heist. I mean, this is a massive sanction evasion event, right? This is a huge amount of money being stolen in just one hack because of the vulnerabilities of this cryptocurrency exchange that they thought was secure. And so this is happening all around the world constantly. It's not always this large amount of money. It's often smaller amounts build up over time. But there are a number of different instances where large, established, very wealthy, well-funded public cryptocurrency exchanges and virtual asset service providers have been hacked and money lost. And so if you had, your life savings in cryptocurrency with Bybit, there's really not much you can do. That money is gone. I also like to share this next case, which is called the Marine Chain case, because it shows how the emerging nature of the technology of cryptocurrency provides other types of means for sanctions evasion. And so in 2018, a new blockchain-enabled virtual token or cryptocurrency company was set up in Hong Kong and Singapore by one named Captain Jonathan Foong Kah Kiong. Foong had extensive maritime experience, was a shipping captain in his own right, had his own company based in Singapore called SingClass. He had been somewhat involved in linked to DPRK maritime evasion activities in the past, but nothing really concrete. So what happened was Fung is approached by one Julian Kim, aka Tony Walker, which also is a great name, to essentially just act as an advisor on this new blockchain platform they were creating called Marine Chain. Fung would control 100% of the company, but Kim would do all the actual work. And you can see here in these text messages that were covered by the United Nations Security Council Committee responsible for North Korean sanctions implementation. You see you see essentially Fung being approached by Walker explaining it. Fung saying, bro, too much responsibility and not much time to look after the operation aspect. That might be tough for us all. Money from you aside. And Tony Walker says, don't worry about the operation. You can simply write me authorization letter and let me handle the whole thing, right? So very clear from this, Julian Kim, aka Captain Jonathan, was just essentially the front person, right, for this front company that was being run by Julian Kim, aka Tony Walker, who was essentially a DPRK intelligence agent. So what was this? The idea behind Marine Chain is really quite clever. So one of the major challenges North Korea has in terms of sanction evasion is the ability to move goods around. And so there are a number of vessels that have already been identified as being linked to North Korea. So they are refused entry to ports, they are tracked, they are interdicted if they have an opportunity to interdict them. So North Korea maintains a shadow fleet of ships in order to both bring materials and goods into the country and take materials and goods out of the country for sale. Oftentimes, this is coal or weapons. So North Korea recognized that this is a great opportunity to hide ownership of marine vessels, of shipping vessels. And so Kim went through all this process, created a website, hired consultants and law firms, was making payments that you can see here in order to create a cryptocurrency that when you bought a token of Marine Chain, you owned a portion of a shipping vessel somewhere. And so North Korea both raised money doing this while also developing a means to essentially hide their ownership or participation in controlling certain shipping vessels. So it serves two purposes for DPRK sanction evasion: raise money and disguise their connection to shipping vessels to gauge in other sanctions evasion activity, all through this one cryptocurrency. This did not work. They were identified, reported to. Kim disappeared. They left a lot of bills unpaid. Fung gave some testimony, but nothing really came from that. And Kim and other DPRK individuals were also indicted by the United States later on in this scheme to essentially, again, purchase fractional ownership interests in marine vessels in order to control those interests and hide that. So Marine Chain is a great case of how cryptocurrency can be more than just fundraising. And whatever it can do, those trying to evade sanctions, money launder to pay for weapons programs will find a way to do that. This brings us to the blenders who I talked about. So how exactly are you taking something that is on the blockchain, is generally publicly available to trace, and moving it and laundering it and hiding it? So one of the ways they do this is through something called cryptocurrency blenders. So how these work is you see this great infographic here. There's a cybercrime event, DPRK hacks your university, they freeze your IT account, you pay 100 Bitcoin to get it released. The Bitcoin goes to their wallet that they tell you to pay it to, but that wallet's going to be burned, right? We all know that wallet address. That wallet can't stay there forever. They move this money into a blender, into a mixer. This mixes the Bitcoin proceeds or the cryptocurrency proceeds with lots of other transactions at the same time and changes which Bitcoin goes to which account. And then the mixed proceeds are then moved to other various wallets, and it becomes really, really hard to distinguish which wallets are legitimate on this end and which wallets are not legitimate. And so in 2022, the US actually sanctioned numerous of these entities that are oftentimes just open source programs, right? They're not companies per se, they're not businesses. They're programs developed by cryptocurrency programmers, and then they're used essentially on their own. Tornado Cash is another one of these. Laundered over $7 billion in illicitly acquired virtual assets. Almost $500 million of that was for the was for the North Koreans. These sanctions were removed by the Trump administration. There were claims that this was a difficult legal case and that the US might not have the legal powers to sanction a computer program. So these were removed from the sanctions list. You can't use them to money launder, but you can use them. And so there's this kind of weird kind of dynamic going on right now. The creator of actually one of the first Tornado Cash was actually arrested for a money laundering violation. So it's in this weird, murky gray zone right now. That said, there's a lot of them. They're being currently used. So what have the regulatory responses been, right? It's very clear that huge amounts of money are being stolen and laundered to fund weapons programs and evade our sanctions, right? Making our sanctions regimes weaker, making potential adversaries such as North Korea stronger. So what has the regulatory response been? Well, at first, it was pretty extensive. In 2023, the Justice Department went after one of the largest virtual asset service providers known as Binance. They went after its CEO and the company itself. They managed to win a $4 billion penalty, which was a record penalty at the time. They also were Binance was also forced to retain independent monitors for 3 years and develop under US government guidance additional, more robust safeguards. So this is, in terms of sanctions implementation and evasion and regulation and enforcement, a pretty serious charge. This is a huge criminal penalty. You actually see criminal penalties for individuals, which you don't necessarily often see, where the leader of Binance was sentenced to prison. There were a few others who were sentenced to prison, BitMEX in particular. This is actually a direct quote from one compliance employee. "We need a banner. Is washing drug money too hard for these days? Come to Binance. We got cake for you," right? And so it was an open joke that they were not doing what they needed to do. And actually, the words specifically used by the DOJ in their press releases and discussions after the guilty pleas was willful violations. These were not ignorant violations or they just weren't quite doing enough. These were willful violations where people in the company itself were making active decisions to pursue profits over safeguarding the access and the exchange of cryptocurrency. That started to change. So I actually had to update this PowerPoint yesterday because this New York Times article literally came out yesterday morning or afternoon, where Binance employees find that $1.7 billion of cryptocurrency was sent to Iranian entities. These compliance employees were promptly fired by Binance after this was identified and reported. This is very much a live story. This New York Times article came out yesterday, but clearly maybe the independent monitors and robust safeguards might not be as effective as we thought they were. The Trump administration has also taken a very unique, different tact to cryptocurrency sanctions enforcement. The phrase that was thrown around in the beginning of the Trump administration was no more, quote unquote, regulation by prosecution. So the idea here was that by prosecuting entities and individuals leading the entities involved in virtual asset service providers that are involved in sanctions evasion, you are hindering, essentially hindering economic growth, hindering progress, hindering the development of technology that's critical to the American economy was the idea behind it. They still continue to do enforcement. So there are enforcement actions against individual accounts, wallets, entities, but they are no longer going after virtual asset service providers that might be, willfully ignoring these controls, or even, a step down, just not doing what they are legally obliged to do in terms of preventing money laundering and sanctions evasion. I think the best way that I like to think about it is the safeguards that tech companies have for content on their platforms I think is a similar way to think about it here, and that the virtual asset service providers aren't to be punished or aren't to be held to account. It's the individuals using it, right? It's the individuals using these virtual asset service providers to break the law. We've also seen deregulation of banking industry rules on crypto. The main DOJ crypto crime unit, which investigated both fraud and sanctions evasion, was basically disintegrated. And they also canceled numerous investigations into entity or virtual asset service providers in failing to enforce controls. This is in addition to some of the pardons that I'm sure you've heard about that have occurred over the last year. That said, there are a lot of other regulatory responses that we're seeing really across the world. A lot of these are starting to line up with some of the best practices we see from the Financial Action Task Force, who again is an international body tasked with helping countries develop and implement best practices for anti-money laundering controls. For example, Singapore is now licensing virtual asset service providers. The United States does have a number of different efforts here in order to bring regulation in. The Genius Act introduced some regulations, though a lot of people feel that they did not go far enough in terms of addressing the money laundering and sanction evasion powers of crypto. And you can see a number of different regulatory responses here. This is directly from a Financial Action Task Force report on implementation progress. And so you see here, this is just a small selection, but you see that there are varying progress in terms of these different best practices regarding cryptocurrency being used as a money laundering tool. So I think the big takeaway from what do we think about, or what are the threats of cryptocurrency when it comes to sanction evasion, the very first one that I say at the end of this presentation, whenever we give it to either foreign government officials or economic officials or financial entities, is that it's not going away. Even if you hear that the price of Bitcoin has crashed, even if it drops back down to $20,000, cryptocurrency as a form of sanction evasion is only going to grow. Especially as sanctions regimes maybe expand, as sanctions become more stringent, especially on new entities in the last couple of years like Russia. These are only going to expand. We're only going to see cryptocurrency being used more and more and more creative ways to evade sanctions to fund weapons programs or war. It's because of these unique ways, right? Cryptocurrency provides means for DPRK not only to move money around, right? To move money it's raised in other sanction evasion efforts, but it allows them to raise money as well. It allows them to raise a lot of money, right? And this is increasingly important for North Korea. Finally, national authorities, especially with non-proliferation responsibilities, need to be aware of these threats. They need to identify that cryptocurrency is a key part of non-proliferation controls going forward, and they need to account for these as well. And this is something that Bryan and my colleague Tajin talk about in their book, and something that we do in some of our outreach events as well. So with that, I think I'll hand it back to Bryan and open the floor up to any questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Nolan. We have a couple of questions that have already come in that we can start with. One of the first ones is really about the regulatory frameworks that you ended your presentation on. One of the questions we had is whether or not you think that there's been enough regulation of cryptocurrency, and will new regulations continue to develop and grow, or has there been kind of a stabilization of cryptocurrency regulations, maybe domestically or internationally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think in terms of internationally, we do see progress. We do see positive growth. Just looking at this chart, so this report was drawn from 2024. If you look at the report from 2023 or 2022, you see a trend line going up, right? That more countries, more jurisdictions are recognizing the risks, are recognizing the threats, and are taking steps to implement best practices, right? These best practices can range from the most fundamental, having the law, right, having the legal authority to implement regulations, all the way to making sure that entities in your jurisdiction know the threats, know their responsibilities. So globally, I would say progress is good. The threats are being recognized. There is support for developing these best practices. And there generally seems to be a lot of interest in developing these regulatory responses as well, especially as cryptocurrency begins to grow, increasingly spreads, becomes increasingly accessible. You're seeing countries that are even going all in on cryptocurrency, like the United Arab Emirates, taking regulatory action. So if I go back to my previous slide here, the UAE created what was really the first crypto regulatory body, Vera, right? And so governments recognize the risk, and there is progress. Domestically, probably not so much for the time being. I think the Trump administration has made it clear, going back to here, no regulation by prosecution. I don't expect to see any sort of regulatory or certainly a law outside the Genius Act, which introduced some of the anti-money laundering and sanction evasion safeguards for stable coins, which is a cryptocurrency linked to the US dollar oftentimes. But generally it's assumed, and I think there's a good argument that they don't go far enough. They don't. They often only add the controls to people selling the stable coin, not the people transferring the stable coin or all of the other virtual asset service providers that might be touching the coin. And so internationally, we're seeing good progress, and I think that progress will continue. Domestically, probably not so much, but we are seeing from the US government an interest in helping countries develop these regulations abroad, right? So we might not be seeing it so much domestically, but we're seeing it an interest in helping other countries implement kind of the foundational best practices as well. And Bryan, I don't know if you want to comment on the work you've done on your book, what you've seen.
Well, as a shameless plug, as part of being part of this, my colleague Tagjan Casanova and I just finished a book on proliferation financing writ large called "Banks and the Bomb," that we're waiting to see if Stanford University Press is going to release it. It's under contract right now, and one of the things that we saw within that book that was looking at both the legitimate financial system in addition to uh, the illicit crypto realm is that a lot of countries, as Nolan's saying, that are under sanctions are looking for ways to engage in financial transactions that are not subject to U.S. control, European control, and oversight that would potentially prohibit or allow for the disruption of proliferation or sanctions evasion activities if they occurred in the using the normal formal financial system. And so crypto is really, I guess I would say, a boon for Iran, for DPRK, to some extent for Russia, as a way to continue to engage in global commerce through avoiding many of the financial restrictions that governments have put in place to stop them from using the formal banking system. So I think the conclusions we had in our broader look at proliferation financing really reinforce what Nolan talked about with cryptocurrency. I guess one of the questions I had for maybe many of the people that are on this call is if they want to engage in cryptocurrency trading, if they want to be involved in this, are there safer cryptocurrencies? Are there safer mechanisms to be able to engage in maybe benefiting from the use of crypto without potentially being exploited by proliferators like Iran and DPRK? How do you engage in this ecosystem safely? If you've got any advice on that.
Yeah, that's a great. So I think the first one, just from a fraud angle, is don't buy any coins that aren't the mainstream coins. So just recently, there was an instance where a public official debuted a coin. The coin was debuted and it was benched at like a certain price point, and then I think within a day the price crashed, right? And that individual had withdrawn their funds. I'm not going to name anyone. But that's the problem if you're just buying random coins you might hear on the internet, right? That there's something called pump and dump schemes where I'll create a coin, I'll pump the coin up, say, hey, everyone, this coin's the future, it's the future, it's the future, buy it, buy it, buy it. Coin releases, everybody buys it, I sell my shares, the price drops, right? So if you want to engage in this, you should be buying the traditional coins, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, maybe stable coins that are more pegged to the US dollar. In terms of their utility, um, honestly, outside of speculation, which I think is a lot of what cryptocurrency is, there's not a ton, especially like that. You're not going to be. There are you can use crypto to buy things online. You can use crypto to buy things at some stores. You can buy crypto, but in terms of like your everyday economic life, I don't think it's really gotten to that point for most people that it really makes sense to have, well, I got to have my crypto account in case I have to buy something with crypto. Um, in terms of who you should be using if you do want to engage in that investment, most banks now offer cryptocurrency. Most like investment platforms also as well. So, I mean, my recommendation would be go with the more traditional um, well-known systems that might be having that, so who might be buying crypto on your behalf, or for example, Robinhood, which is the mobile app that you can engage in stock exchanging with. You can buy crypto from them, which essentially they have their own reserve of crypto, and you're just buying some of that rather than engaging in the full cryptocurrency ecosystem where you're going to a virtual asset service provider, creating your own wallet. Um, there's risks there, right? Just ask the people who might have had cryptocurrency stored with Bybit from the UAE. There are risks out there, right? There are risks of theft, there are risks of fraud. Um, and unlike with maybe traditional economic services, if your money is lost, it's lost. So if you do want to engage in this, my recommendation would be go through some of the more traditional services that might be offering this.
So we received a question from online, and the question is, how much of the current administration's reluctance to prosecute is based on Trump's personal investment in cryptocurrency?
Um, I think there is definitely a shift in President Trump's attitude towards cryptocurrency. I think if you look at his statements 5 years ago, he thought Bitcoin was a joke, and clearly that's not the case anymore. I think that there's very much been an ideological shift in the Trump administration in terms of how they think about this. It's very much, if I go back to the other slide, this phrase that really came up a lot in their cryptocurrency investigation: no more regulation by prosecution. I would say that is also in line with maybe a lot of their other ideological positions. In terms of whether or not he's not going after them for personal and financial reasons, I have no comment there. Draw your own conclusions. But from a proliferation standpoint, I would argue that by ignoring the implementation of safeguards at the industry level will hamper America's ability to prevent its adversaries from acquiring funds for weapons programs. That's been well established. If we think about traditional strategic trade controls, about the spread of the technology themselves, a key component of that is holding industry accountable. And if you don't hold industry accountable, you're playing a cat and mouse game even more so than you already are, trying to essentially whack-a-mole the heads that pop up as it happens. It's not an effective means to stop proliferation financing or illicit anti-money laundering violations. I don't know, Brian, if you have a comment on that.
No, I think you did a good job. Are there any other questions from the online community? I mean, if you want to raise your hand and ask, or send me a question via chat. Maybe in the interim, just one more question, Nolan. I guess when you're thinking about cryptocurrency and who the most savvy actors are. You really leaned into focusing on the DPRK. Um, is this the type of threat that you really need experienced, knowledgeable actors to be able to utilize it effectively for evading sanctions? Or would you say that the techniques and tools that have been used in some of these prominent cases could potentially be open to a lot of actors that are also subject to sanctions, but aren't one of like the key players that we've identified right now? Meaning, is what we viewed with DPRK and to some extent Iran and Russia, is that going to become very widespread, or do we really see this as a problem concentrated on the countries that have become tried to become real experts on it?
I mean, I would split it up. So if it's just in terms of basic money laundering violations, that's not that complicated. I'm sorry, 1 minute, bud. Can you go back? It's not that complicated, right? It's a simple means to engage in money laundering, and the money laundering that we see is extensive, right? It's not just sanctions evaders, it's drug cartels, it's people engaged in human trafficking. It's really become a core money laundering tenet there. To engage in the types of heists and cyber attacks that the DPRK does to also raise money, that's very complicated. You have to have pretty extensive capacities in order to engage there. But in terms of just the money laundering capacity, it's something that I think we're going to see a lot more of, especially as cryptocurrency begins to develop and grow and become more widespread, while also leading to a situation where you might not be able to raise the funds through cyber attacks, but you could move them pretty easily.
Okay. Well, I see that you've got other domestic constituencies that are demanding your attention, and we've gone a pretty long time already. So, with that, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Fahrenkopf, for your presentation, and also to thank the entire community who decided to come and spend their lunch hour with us, learning about a really interesting kind of aspect of my Pisces team's work. We're very involved in trying to stop some of these really challenging threats to U.S. national security and international security, finding ways of leveraging proliferation financing controls, economic sanctions, strategic trade controls to keep some of the world's most dangerous weapons away from the world's most dangerous actors. And so we appreciate your interest. And if you want to learn more about our work, feel free to follow up. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions, and hopefully you'll be hearing about the work produced by our team in the future. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.